I did not go to his wedding, which is a sentence that still sounds worse out loud than it does in my head, probably because saying it to someone else requires context, and context requires admitting how long I let myself be wrong about something fundamental. People asked me about it at the time, friends mostly, a few family members who were still speaking to both of us, and they all said some variation of the same thing. He is still your brother. You should be there. Family is family. And I would nod like I understood their point, like I was genuinely considering their advice, but the entire time I was thinking the same thing I had been thinking for 3 years. Not anymore. He stopped being my brother the day he decided that money mattered more than I did. The truth is, by the time that wedding invitation arrived in my mailbox with both our names printed in careful calligraphy on cream-colored paper that probably cost more per square inch than I wanted to think about, we had not really been brothers for a long time. Not since the will, not since that afternoon in the lawyer's office when I learned exactly how little I had mattered to the one person I thought would never betray me. My father died on a Tuesday in March, which I only remember because it was the first warm day of the year, the kind of day where you start thinking about opening windows and putting away winter coats, and the wrongness of planning a funeral during weather that felt like a beginning instead of an ending made the whole thing harder to process. It was unexpected. No long illness we had been bracing for, no gradual decline that would have given us time to prepare or say the things you are supposed to say before someone is gone. He went to work Monday morning complaining about a headache he thought was from not drinking enough water, and by Tuesday evening he was gone. Aneurysm, the kind of medical event that does not give warnings or second chances. Grief does strange things to people. Makes them behave in ways they would not normally behave, makes small disagreements feel enormous, and enormous losses feel somehow too big to fully comprehend. But money, I learned, makes grief worse in specific ways. Money turns sadness into suspicion, and mourning into strategy. And when you add inheritance to fresh grief, you get a particular kind of poison that can destroy relationships faster than almost anything else. We sat in a lawyer's office 2 weeks after the funeral, my brother Nathan and I, sitting in chairs that were probably expensive but felt uncomfortable in the deliberate way that office furniture feels uncomfortable, like someone decided that legal proceedings should never be too relaxing. The room smelled like old wood and bad coffee and something else I could not identify. Maybe just the accumulated anxiety of everyone who had ever sat in those chairs waiting to hear how their lives were about to change. The lawyer was a man named Preston, who had the kind of voice people develop when they spend decades reading documents out loud to people who do not want to hear what is in them. Formal and careful and completely devoid of emotion. He started reading the will. At first, everything sounded normal, or at least normal in the way wills are normal when you have never actually sat through one before. Savings split between various accounts, the house and how it would be handled, instructions about personal items, about my father's tools and his books and the watch he wore every day that I had always assumed would eventually be mine because he used to let me wear it when I was a kid and pretend I was going to important meetings. Small details that felt both meaningful and completely irrelevant depending on which second you were thinking about them. Then Preston paused in a way that made me pay attention differently, the kind of pause that signals something significant is about to be said, and he read my brother's name, followed by a number that did not make any sense. $240,000. Not from a life insurance policy or a retirement account, from the estate directly. A specific bequest that had been carved out before anything else was divided. Then he read my name, followed by what was left after that bequest and after taxes and after the various debts and expenses had been settled. $17,000 and some change I don't even remember anymore. I thought I had misheard. I actually asked him to repeat it, asked him if maybe there was a page missing or if the numbers were in the wrong order. He confirmed in that same careful voice that he had read it correctly. The room felt different after that, smaller somehow, like the walls had moved closer, like the air had changed composition. I looked at Nathan waiting for something, though I was not entirely sure what. Confusion, maybe? Or shock? Some visible sign that he was as surprised as I was by this massive disparity that made no sense, given that we were both his sons, both loved equally as far as I had ever known. An explanation, an acknowledgement, anything that would indicate he had not known this was coming. But Nathan just sat there, quiet and still and not meeting my eyes. And that silence, that specific quality of silence that was not confusion or surprise, but something closer to resignation, told me more than any explanation could. He knew. He had known before we walked into this office. Maybe he had known for months. That's when the story started forming in my head, the narrative that would sustain my anger for the next 3 years. He had done something, convinced my father somehow, poisoned him against me, positioned himself as the responsible one or the deserving one, or whatever story he had sold that resulted in this grotesque imbalance. He had manipulated a dying man and stolen what should have been mine, or at least stolen the equity that should have existed between us as brothers. I believed that story completely. Not because I had proof, not because Nathan had ever given me any reason in our entire lives to think he was capable of that level of betrayal, but because it made sense in the moment. It explained the numbers. It explained his silence. It gave me something concrete to be angry at instead of just being sad and confused and hurt. We did not fight that day. Not in the lawyer's office, where Preston sat watching us with the practiced neutrality of someone who has seen families implode over money more times than he probably cares to count. We just left separately, Nathan walking out first without saying anything, and me sitting there for another few minutes trying to understand how my entire understanding of my family had just been rewritten by a single paragraph in a legal document. The distance that grew between us after that was not dramatic. There were no shouting matches or accusations hurled across parking lots. Just cold, quiet separation, the kind that accumulates slowly like snow until one day you look up and realize you are standing on opposite sides of something that has become too deep to cross easily. He tried to talk to me once, maybe a week after the will reading. Called my phone and I watched it ring without picking up, watched his name appear on the screen, and felt something hard and angry in my chest that made answering feel like weakness. He left a message saying we should talk, that there were things I did not understand, and I deleted it without listening all the way through, because in my mind there was nothing he could say that would change what he had done. Years passed. 3 of them, to be specific, though they didn't feel dramatic or significant in their passing, just quiet and separate. We lived in the same city, but moved in different circles, saw different people, went to different places. I would hear about him occasionally through mutual acquaintances, hear that he was doing well or that he had gotten engaged, and each piece of information felt like confirmation that he was moving forward with the money he had taken, while I was still stuck trying to rebuild from almost nothing. Then, one day, my phone rang with a number I recognized but had not seen in years. The same lawyer, Preston. I almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail because I couldn't imagine what legal matter would require his involvement in my life 3 years after my father's death. But something made me pick up anyway. Maybe just curiosity, or maybe the particular kind of anxiety that comes from seeing a lawyer's number appear unexpectedly. He said there was something else from my father's estate, a delayed release that had been contingent on certain conditions being met, and those conditions apparently just had been fulfilled. I didn't understand what he was talking about, didn't know that wills could have delayed releases or conditional bequests or any of the complicated legal structures that apparently exist for situations I had never imagined. I asked what condition. He said that my brother had to complete certain obligations first. Obligations that had been outlined in a separate document that Nathan had been given after the initial will reading. And suddenly, everything I thought I understood about what had happened 3 years ago started feeling less solid, less certain. I went to Preston's office the next day. Same building, same uncomfortable chairs, same smell of old wood and bad coffee. But the feeling was different this time. Less like grief and more like confusion, like I was about to learn something that would require me to reconsider conclusions I had spent 3 years treating as facts. Preston handed me a file folder that was thicker than I expected, the kind of thickness that suggests complicated documentation and extensive records. Inside were bank statements and receipts and transfer records, pages and pages of financial transactions that I did not immediately understand the significance of. And underneath all of that, a letter in my father's handwriting, the same careful script he used for anything important, addressed to me. I did not open the letter right away. I looked at the financial documents first, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Medical bills, dozens of them, hundreds of them, from hospitals and specialists and treatment centers I had never heard of, experimental therapies, clinical trials, payments for procedures that cost more than I made in a year. All of it dated from the 8 months before my father died, the same 8 months when I had thought he was basically healthy apart from the usual complaints that come with being in your 60s. The amounts matched. The $240,000 that Nathan had received had been almost entirely depleted paying for treatments I had not known my father was getting, for a diagnosis I had not known he had received. My brother had not taken the money. He had spent it on our father, on treatments that ultimately did not work, but that had been attempted anyway because there was money available to attempt them, and because my father had asked him to handle it all, and because Nathan had agreed to carry that burden alone. I sat there in Preston's office for a long time, just reading through the records, understanding slowly and painfully how completely wrong I had been. Every payment was documented. Every decision Nathan had made was laid out in careful detail. The money had not been a gift or an inheritance in any traditional sense. It had been a responsibility, a weight my father had placed on Nathan's shoulders with specific instructions not to tell me because he had known somehow that I would try to help in ways we could not afford. Finally, I opened the letter from my father. His handwriting looked the same as it always had, steady and precise, and reading it felt like hearing his voice again after 3 years of silence. "If you are reading this," it started, "then I did not make it, and I am sorry for that, but not surprised. The doctors gave me less than a year from the time of diagnosis, and I have used as much of that year as I could manage." He explained everything. The cancer diagnosis he had received 9 months before he died, the prognosis that had been bad from the start, the experimental treatments he had wanted to try despite the low success rates because he was not ready to give up yet, and because he had money that could pay for things insurance would not cover, and the decision he had made to ask Nathan to handle it all without telling me. "I know how you are," he wrote, "and I mean that with love but also with certainty. You would have dropped everything. You would have quit your job to take care of me full time, or drained your savings trying to pay for treatments alongside your brother, or done something equally self-destructive that would have left you financially ruined when this was over. And I could not let that happen. I needed one of you to keep building a life, to keep moving forward, to not spend what might be my last year watching me decline in hospitals." So Nathan carried it instead, the treatments and the appointments and the difficult conversations with doctors about what to try next when nothing was working, the stress of managing my father's medical care while also trying to maintain his own life and job, the weight of keeping that secret from me because our father had asked him to. And when the treatments failed and my father died anyway, Nathan had carried that too. The guilt of not being able to save him despite spending everything they had available, the grief of losing him while also dealing with the complicated medical aftermath, and me believing for 3 years that he had betrayed me, hating him for something he had actually sacrificed for. I closed the letter and sat in that office chair feeling something much worse than anger, Shame. The deep, sick kind of shame that comes from realizing you have been catastrophically wrong about something that mattered, that you have hurt someone who did not deserve it based on assumptions you never bothered to verify. Because I had never asked, never questioned my initial interpretation, never gave Nathan the chance to explain because I was so certain I already knew the truth. I had just decided he was guilty and walked away from him completely, and he had let me, probably because he was too exhausted from everything he had been dealing with to fight for a relationship with someone who had already concluded he was a terrible person. I called him that night, didn't plan what I would say, didn't rehearse an apology or an explanation, just called his number and hoped he would answer, even though I wouldn't have blamed him if he didn't. He picked up on the third ring, said my name like a question, cautious and careful, like he wasn't entirely sure why I was calling after 3 years of silence. We did not talk about everything immediately. Some things are too big and too complicated to address in a single conversation, but we talked, and for the first time in 3 years I listened instead of assuming, asked questions instead of making accusations, and slowly started to understand the full shape of what had actually happened during those months when I thought I knew exactly what my brother was. It took time to rebuild what I had broken, months of careful conversations and earned trust, and me proving that I had actually learned something from being so completely wrong. But we got there eventually. I went to his next wedding, the one that happened 2 years later, after he had worked through his own complicated feelings about family and trust, and whether relationships that fall apart can actually be repaired. And every time someone asks me about those 3 years when we did not speak, when I skipped his wedding and convinced myself I was justified, I tell them the truth, that the biggest mistake I ever made was not trusting the wrong person. It was deciding someone was wrong without ever asking them for the truth, without giving them the chance to explain, without considering that my interpretation of events might be incomplete or incorrect, or shaped entirely by my own hurt instead of what had actually happened. Because sometimes the story you tell yourself is easier than the reality, easier to be angry than to be uncertain, easier to blame someone than to admit you might not understand the whole picture. And if you are not careful, that easy story can cost you years with someone who deserved better from you than assumptions and silence.